let's talk about how to take better notes. What we're going to do later, just to give you a little preview, is that actually we're going to do a test together. We're going to do a TOEFL listening test. It looks something like this, and I'm going to share my iPad here. So this is pretty fancy stuff. And what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to see me take notes while we listen as well. So you can see an example of me writing down notes very sloppily while we listen. So that's what we're going to do after the first part, where I talk about some rules that you should follow to take better notes. And we're going to do 3 passages after that. All right, so let's get into it right now. And so let me go back to my presentation here and ask questions in the chat. Let me know if you need anything. So how to take better notes. Let's talk about it. So the first thing is that, well, visit tsdprep.com. This is our website. You can enter the coupon code TSDPrepJosh for 10% off any TOEFL stuff, classes, tests, all that kind of stuff. Check out TSD Prep. Now, sorry, I just got to get that out of the way, but I'm very excited to talk about this, is that, do I have to take notes? Because that's the big question, right? Because taking notes is really hard. A lot of people feel like that they don't really need to take notes, that they can answer all the questions without taking notes. And then other people feel that notes are pretty distracting, that, actually taking notes makes you lose focus on actually listening to the passage. So, just to give you I'm going to go into this more, but to give you a quick answer is that no, you don't have to take notes. If you feel like it helps you focus without taking notes, you don't have to take notes. But I do think it's going to be pretty hard to answer all the questions correctly if you don't take notes. So, and you'll see some examples of that as we go. So to answer your question, you don't have to take notes. I'm going to show you some ways actually to take notes with just like 5 words. Okay, so I'm going to show you some examples of how to take notes with just writing a couple words down, and they can be helpful. All right, so let's get into this. And so, do you have to take notes? No. So here are some common objections, things that people say when I say you have to take notes. They say, I can't take notes and listen at the same time. Or if I take notes, then I miss part of the passage, like I'm writing down notes and then I don't listen to what's being said, right? Or I don't know what I should write down. A lot of people just write down everything. So everything they hear without really understanding the meaning. Like you hear the words and you write down the words, but you don't really know what these things mean, right? So these are some common objections. All of them are understandable, and we're going to talk about it. And just my big kind of piece of advice for this whole thing with TOEFL listening and taking notes is to just try not to do too much. Just focus on doing one thing at a time, taking a couple notes of what you hear, write down just a few words if you can't write down a whole lot, take it one step at a time, go slow. That's the big piece of advice I'm going to keep going back to again and again. Just take it slow, relax. Don't worry about trying to write down everything. So let's see here. I'm going to add a couple comments here just as they come up. What Roger says, for me, note-taking is about writing down key information that I may forget after listening because it's very detailed. So years, amounts of data that can be asked, and so on. So what he's saying is that, if they start saying numbers in the TOEFL listening, like let's say, for example, they say that this invention was discovered in 1868, and then they made a new invention in 1972. And so he's thinking that I have to write down those numbers and those dates. They're very important. Yes and no. To be honest, in terms of what ETS says, the TOEFL listening is not measuring if you can hear all those little details, but instead if you understand the basic general idea of the listening. There are some questions that ask for details, but we're going to look at some examples of TOEFL listening passages. And one thing you're going to notice is that there's only like 1 or 2 questions about details. A lot of the questions are about the general idea, how to make an inference. So, these details are important. If you hear them, write them down. But you don't have to worry too much about writing down all of these details. It's not that important. Okay, so, but we'll talk about it as we go. And let me keep going here. So, 5 rules for note taking. First rule, write down mostly nouns, verbs, and adjectives. So, what do I mean by that? I mean, write down nouns, verbs, and adjectives. If you don't know what a verb, noun, and adjective is, you can ask Google. But basically, you don't need to write down these function words. These are prepositions, articles, auxiliary verbs, modals, conjunctions, pronouns, and demonstratives. So these are the words that you don't have to write down. So what we're going to talk about right now is ways to write down your notes so you can save time. And so one way to save time is not to write down every little single word that you see, right? That you hear. So you want to make sure that you don't do that. And so don't write down in or could or but. You know, if it's really important, you can. But for the most part, you don't really need to write down those little words. Content words are the types of words that you should write down. Nouns like, for example, cat, table, school are some nouns. Adjectives, lazy, wooden, big. Adverbs, quickly, suddenly. Main verb, jump, shake, listen. So these are words that you should be writing down in your notes. And the best thing is for me to give you an example. If I hear this sentence that says, since the 1980s, meteorite finds in the Antarctic have dramatically increased our knowledge of space and its materials. Sorry, there's a typo here with this period with the S. I don't need to write down these little words, right? Since and in and the and are and of and at and it's. You know, you don't have to write those little words down. Okay, so that's one quick tip, is that you don't need to write down all these little function words. So don't worry about writing those. The second thing is write down mostly consonants. So this is another thing, is that you can misspell your words. You don't have to write down the words as they, you don't have to write down everything correctly. It's not a spelling test. So for example, vowels, A, E, I, O, and U, you don't have to write down those vowels. So instead, you can write down just consonants. So to give you an example, to go back to this example here. So 1980s meteorite finds Antarctic dramatically increased. So I basically just cut out all the vowels, okay? Now, sometimes you cut out all the vowels and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like here, Antarctic, there's no A, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense here. So this is not a rule that you have to follow like 100% of the time. You should never write down vowels or anything like that. This is just kind of to give you an idea of ways to write down less. You don't have to write down vowels in your words. You can kind of skip them most of the time. Not always. Like, for example, maybe you see, like this word finds, I think is pretty easy to understand without I, but maybe this word, MTRT, you won't know what that means. You know, that means meteorite. So that would be pretty hard to figure out, right? So use your brain, use your best judgment, but basically a lot of vowels you can kind of cut out. And a good example here is knowledgeable. Knowledge. And here it just looks like this, but I can kind of figure out what this word is. So you don't have to write down vowels. Now, at this point, some of you might be thinking like LV, so in conclusion, write down everything. No, that's not what I mean. This one sentence, we're going to reduce a whole lot, okay? I'm just showing you how to write a lot less, okay? So I'm showing you how to write a lot less in your notes. This is just an example of what your notes should look like compared to what something would look like on paper, on a sentence. So I think a lot of students are missing the practical ways of writing notes. So I'm just showing you how I write notes and how I give advice for it, so you don't have to write down everything. So no, you don't have to write down everything, and I'll get to that. So this is going to get a lot shorter, I promise. The next thing is know your core symbols. So there's some symbols. And by the way, some people are giving likes and thumbs up. Thank you. I appreciate that. It does motivate me a lot. Somebody, put a like and a little thumb comes up on my screen. It does help me a lot. Thank you. I appreciate that. Know your core symbols. So what do I mean by core symbols? Okay, so what I mean is, let me go to the next page here. Yeah, so there's some symbols that you can write down that are, how how can I say it? There's some symbols that you can write down that instead of saying like benefit or positive, you can just put a plus sign. I just put, I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I just put about 8 symbols here. You don't have to, memorize all these symbols, and you don't have to write more than these symbols. These are just some ideas to help you write less, okay, to help you write less. And so I'll show you what it would look like for an example. So here, instead of I say in the 1980s, what happened? Okay, meteorites in Antarctica dramatically increased, changes to an arrow up, right? So instead of writing dramatically increase, I just put an arrow up. Increased knowledge of space materials, instead of increase, I just put an arrow up again. So these symbols can help me write less, basically. These symbols can help me write less. So just a couple of symbols. Arrows are really good. Let's see what else I have here. This negative sign for not, I use a lot. I'll put a question mark if I'm not sure what's going on exactly in the listening. And then equals or doesn't equal. These are the ones that I use pretty often. You don't have to memorize these. They're just some tips to help you. Now, whenever I talk about listening, I just get a lot of comments like listening is most important. You don't need to take notes, all this kind of stuff. And again, I'm going to just say it over and over again. You don't have to take notes. If you don't want to take notes, don't take notes. Okay? It's not a big deal. It's up to you, really. I'm just trying to show you better ways to take notes if you want to take notes. And the reason why I recommend taking notes is because they do ask you questions about certain details in the TOEFL listening. And so if they're going to ask you questions about certain details, it's going to be hard to remember all of it if you don't take notes. Now, I'm going to show you how to take less notes and smarter notes. I'm not telling you you have to take notes. Not saying that. Okay? All right. So this is just advice. Take advice and do with it what you want. The next thing is to include 7 words or less per line. So what does that mean, to include seven words or less per line? Basically what that means is that when you have a certain piece of information, you don't want to just kind of put a lot of information in one line. So for example here, in the 1980s, meteorite finds in Antarctica dramatically increased. So I have these 80s meteorite finds, Antarctica increased, and I have another piece of information next to it. There is more knowledge about space materials. So these two are different pieces of information. It would be better if I indented and had them on separate lines. And so actually, let me move my face here. Indent when 2 pieces of information are connected. So what I do here is I separate this information like this. So I put it on a separate line. Okay, so I put it on a separate line, this separate piece of information. So in the 1980s, the meteorite finds in Antarctica increased, and then it increased our knowledge of space materials. So as you can see, I went from, let's see, look at my notes for this passage here. So there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3 words and a couple symbols. There's 3 words and a symbol. So I reduced the amount of words and things that I wrote down from this and what it was before. Let me see if I can just jump back here. What it was before was, I wish I could do it faster here. Come on. Come on. Come on. There it is. So it went from this part, which was a very long thing to write down, right? Lots of words, lots of letters, to something that's pretty short. That looks like, if I can jump around, that looks like this, okay? So that's the goal here, is to write a lot less. And that's just some examples of how to write less. Okay. Now, so do you have to take notes, yes or no? Just start small. Just write down a few words, a few things. What I'm going to do now is we're going to enter the next part. and the next part is going to be to actually listen to some TOEFL listening. I think we're going to do two. We're going to listen to two TOEFL listening passages, and you're going to watch me take notes at the same time, and you should take notes at the same time as well. So let me go to that, and let's see here. Yeah, so Bruno mentioned that it looks like, this is more difficult, like actually cutting off the words and sounds. It might be more difficult to read. Yeah, make sure that you understand your notes, of course. When you guys see my notes, you're gonna see them and be like, dude, I don't know what the hell you're writing. So that's okay. I know what I'm writing, and that's the most important thing. So you want to make sure that you understand your notes. And again, the really, really big thing is just write down a little bit. You don't have to write down a lot. Just write down a few things that you'll find helpful. I'm going to go over some questions to ask yourself before you start actually taking notes as well. So we'll do all this stuff together. So Uber sounds like I need to practice a lot. That looks like Zaitz from Kimetsu no Yaiba. But no, yeah, so some people would need more practice than others. It depends. I definitely would recommend, doing a TOEFL listening practice, seeing how you feel, and seeing if it's really necessary for you to take notes, like this. When you guys see my notes, you might think, oh, this is a lot. Or, what I'll do is I'll do two examples. I'll do an example of writing down a lot and writing down very little. And I'll actually write down very little let's see. I'll do it for the lecture. Even though you should write a lot for the lecture, I'll just write down a little and see if it helps me at all. Okay, so I'll show you what that looks like. I'll write down a lot for the, well, let's see. I'll see how much I write down a lot, but I'll definitely write down a little for the lecture so you can see what it looks like. And somebody said something positive. Thank you. I appreciate that, Madhav. Thank you. Positive things help me. So let me go to this little lecture here. Now I'm going to play this audio, and when I play it, just if you could just say in the chat that you can hear it okay, if you want me to turn it up or down. Once I press this start test button, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. Let's see. It doesn't want to zoom in. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can get this a little bigger. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Come on. You can zoom in, right? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, too much. I think that might be good. And let's see here. Okay, that looks okay. And I can still see my iPad here. Okay, sorry, I just got to play with this a little bit just to get this. Okay, it looks pretty good. All right, get a pencil and a piece of paper ready. So let's start taking notes. Now, before we actually, so I'm going to just before we start taking notes, we're listening to the first passage in a listening part. Is it a conversation or a lecture? Let me know. What is it first, a conversation or a lecture when you start listening? What's the first thing that you listen to? Do you listen to a conversation passage or a listening passage? Or an academic passage? Do you listen to a conversation, a campus conversation, or an academic passage? Which one is it? So what you're going to do is that you're going to listen to a conversation first, and it's always between a man and a woman. So what I'm going to do in my notes is that I'm going to write down here. Let me see. Come on. Okay. Oh, no. Okay. So I'm going to write down M and W. Okay. So because I know it's going to be a conversation between a man and a woman, right? Now, also, before you listen to this, you should have some goals in mind. What are your goals before you start to listen to this passage? What are you trying to find? You can't see the questions first, right? So it's not like other tests where you can see the questions first. You have to try to figure out. What is, what's the most important thing to listen for, even though you can't see the questions, right? So what's the most important thing to listen for, even though you can't see the questions? Well, for the conversation, I'm listening for, first of all, the problem. the student is going to have a problem. You can also change this instead of M and W. You could say student and CW, which is campus worker. You can do that too because it's always a student and a campus worker. Sometimes this is sometimes it's a teacher, of course. Usually it's a teacher these days. In the past, they had more of different campus jobs, like working in the IT department or something like that. It's more teachers these days, I've found. So anyway, so you're going to look for the problem and the possible solutions. So the campus worker is going to listen to the problem and they're going to offer probably two solutions, maybe more, maybe less, but they're probably going to offer about two solutions to try to help the student figure out how to solve the problem. That's what I'm listening for. That's my goal for the most part. Okay, so let's listen to this and see what it sounds like. Okay, so says, I think a stenographer could give great advice on the subject of taking notes efficiently. Yeah, probably. For those who don't know, a stenographer is a person in a court that writes down everything that they hear. I don't think they would be so helpful, to be honest, but I like that comment. Okay, here we go. And let me know if you can hear it okay. Now listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor Michaels.
Yes?
My name's James, and I'm a journalism major here, and I was wondering...
If you're here to audition, James, I'm sorry, but this play is only open to theater majors, because it is part of the final project for one of my classes. Only students who are interested in taking my elective their senior year can be in it.
Actually, I'm not here to audition. I was hoping if I could ask you a few questions about Shakespeare, specifically about the play Hamlet. If you have a couple of minutes to spare?
Oh, sure. Sorry I jumped the gun there. I've already had several students today try to audition who weren't theater majors, so I just assumed.
It's no problem, I understand.
Good. So, what would you like to know? Ask away.
Thank you. So I want to verify some details about the play. For one, does Hamlet take place in Denmark or Germany?
Hamlet is from Denmark, and the setting of the play is a castle in Denmark.
Okay, great. And can you explain to me the situation at the beginning of the play? It's so confusing. Who is married to who? Who's related to who?
Sure, it can be definitely confusing. So, Hamlet's father, the King of Denmark, has just died, and when Hamlet returns home, he finds that his mother, the Queen, has already married someone else, who turns out to be Hamlet's uncle, or the dead king's brother.
Oh, wow. Definitely sounds dramatic. Have you ever been in Hamlet or directed the play?
You know what? I hate to say this, but I haven't been in a production of Hamlet, nor have I directed one. It's one of my favorites, though, both of Shakespeare and in general. I would love to direct it someday. It's such an exciting play, lots of great characters. Have you seen it?
I read it in high school, actually, but I haven't seen it performed. Maybe the school should put on a production of Hamlet.
Absolutely. Maybe we can do that next year. What did you say your name was again?
Oh, James.
Oh, right, James. Thank you. I'm sorry, but I've got to run. I need to head to my next class. But if you have any more questions, my colleague, Professor Thompson, also loves Hamlet, and I'm sure he could answer any questions you might throw at him.
Awesome, thank you. I'll stop by his office. Have a great day.
Okay. You know what? Before I explain what I wrote down, let's try to answer the questions. I will give you some time here. Let me see if I can. Okay, I'm just gonna kind of count them down. So I'll just read the questions and then I'll count them down, or I'll just give you like 10 or 20 or 30 seconds. Let me see if I can just pop in. Yeah, okay, so let me just, because I want to put the time up so you can see the time as well. Okay, so here we go. I'll read the question, and then I'll give you, not a lot of time, actually. I'm going to give you less time than usual, 20 seconds to answer each question. So the question is, why does the student go to see the professor? Okay. Next question. Why does Professor Michaels initially think, I'm sorry, what does Professor Michaels initially think is the reason the student came to see her? All right, next question. Why does the professor say Hamlet is one of her favorite plays? Question 4. What does the student mean when he asks the professor to explain the beginning of the play? Next one. What does Professor Michaels imply when she says that Professor Thompson also loves Hamlet? All right. How did you do? Before I give you the answers to that, let me just explain really quickly my notes here and the rationale behind them. So, a couple things. One thing is that this was kind of short. This is about 2 minutes long, a little longer than that, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. The conversations in the TOEFL listening will be um, for the conversations. They'll be probably a little bit longer than this. I'd say probably around 3 minutes. You can expect them to be. So it's a little bit shorter. Also, recently, I actually think this is a kind of easy conversation. I don't know if you think it's more difficult or easier, but I actually think this is a little bit easier than what you would see on TOEFL. And the reason for that is because recently the conversations on TOEFL IBT have been more about like topics that are like in class. There'll be like things that could you explain what barnacles are in my biology class? I didn't understand it. And then they'll explain barnacles in more detail. So there's been more of these things where the students having problems with understanding the topic in class. Last couple times I've taken the test, that's been what I've seen in the conversations. Before, they used to be more practical campus stuff, like, your computer doesn't work, or, this one is a journalism major who's asking questions about Shakespeare. So it's kind of like that a little bit. This is a little bit more like what you would see, but I think the topic is kind of easy. Maybe you disagree. I don't know. And so in my notes, what I wrote down here, I know it's gonna be hard to read. This is journalism. Okay, I wrote down that he's a journalism person. Let me change the color here. And he wants to ask questions about Shakespeare, so I put Shakespeare in Q's. All right. Shakespeare I wrote down. You'll notice I put A and E, even though I told you guys, don't write vowels. Of course, sometimes you need vowels. So these are just kind of guidelines to help you. This is theater majors only. So when he first comes, she thinks when she first comes, she thinks that he wants to go to like audition for the play or something, and she's like, no, this is just for theater majors. But then the conversation progresses, and he's journalism, and he wants to know some things about it. Also, what you'll notice is that there's blank space here. Now, why did I leave this blank space? Because I want to be able to look at my notes and remember kind of the flow of the conversation, who spoke at what time. So when I leave this blank space here and here as well, I'm basically following the flow of the conversation so I know who spoke at what time. If I didn't do this, if I had put this, let's say, school production of Hamlet, like they should put on a school production of Hamlet, if I put that up here, but it's out of place, it would be harder to figure out, right? So it'd be harder to know what I meant by that. So that's why it's there. That's why there's a space here. And also, when I said you don't have to write down as many notes, these words act like triggers, like school production is Hamlet. I remember, oh yeah, okay, so he was saying how the school should put on a school production of Hamlet and it would be a good idea. I remember that was the context. And so let me go through the answers here. This is, when I click next, it's going to start the next one. This is like a test simulation from TST Prep. So, and I'll just put the link to the site there. So this is a like test simulation from there. So you want to be, I can't say next one because then it's going to jump to it. But let me give you the answers here. And so I brought up this sheet and let me see if I could jump around here. And so the first question, number 1, is just purpose, which is basically asking, what's this about? And then the answer is B, and that is, sorry, I have to jump back and forth here. Why does the professor go to see, why does the student go to see the professor? B, he thinks, he wants to ask the professor some questions about Hamlet. The professor thinks he wants to audition, but that's not why he's there. He wants to ask questions about Hamlet. So that's a very common thing where what they think is what they're talking about first, there's a misunderstanding, and then the topic kind of shifts a little bit. So something to keep in mind. What does Professor Michaels initially think is the reason the student came to see her? So this is kind of the same question, right? Why does the professor think the student came? He wants to audition for the school play, right? So that was in my notes here as well. Why does Professor Hamlet is one of her favorite plays? So this is a kind of tricky question. You have to make an inference here. She says that she hasn't been in a production. She says she hasn't directed it. I actually wrote that here. No act. And let me see if I can bring up my notes here. What does it say? Oop. It says, let me change the orientation. Yeah, it says no acting and no directing. It's let me get my pen out. It's here. It's in no acting and no directing. So I had written that down in my notes. All right, what does the student mean when he asks the professor to explain the beginning of the play? So the student is unsure about the relationship of the characters. That sounds okay. The student wants to test her knowledge of the play. That's probably not right. The student does not know the names of the characters. He doesn't say he doesn't know the names. He just is not sure about their relationship. And the student wants to make sure that he will like the play. That's not mentioned. So A is the best answer here. And 5, what does Professor Michaels imply when she says that Professor Thompson also loves the play, is likely knowledgeable? It's been a production the student should tell that he loves him too. Yeah, it's that Professor Thompson is likely knowledgeable. I would also add here, it sounds like this Professor Michaels wants the student to leave her alone. So that's my other little tidbit here. So we're gonna do an academic lecture next. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll bring them up in the chat. I need to kind of just play with my iPad here for a minute. I gotta reorientate this and see if I can get it to cooperate. There we go. Hopefully that'll work. There we go. Okay, that should be better. So yeah, Chuchito says it is kind of easy. Yeah, it's kind of easy. We're gonna do another test right now, Deanna. She just asked, right? Good question from Andre. Says, when the professor mentions the relationship of the characters, should I just dismiss it because it's too detailed? Yeah, this will kind of depend on you. You know, if you think that if you think there's just too much detail and it's not really necessary, you'll kind of have to decide what's important and what's not important. Remember, my goal here was to try to figure out what the problem was. And the problem was that the student needed to learn more about Hamlet. And what are the two solutions? Well, the professor just kind of answers his questions for the most part. It was pretty direct there. So you'll have to decide if what the person is saying is connected to these important ideas, the problem and the possible solutions to the problem. You'll notice that there's a lot of things I didn't write down. We're going to do a lecture right now, and this will be the last kind of workshop that we do. We're going to do the lecture. It's going to take about 4 or 5 minutes to listen to. It's pretty long, and I am actually going to write down very little. I'm going to show you how to write down very little, so it can be so you can see. A lot of people complain about note taking, that they don't need to take notes. Okay, I get it. You don't feel like you need to take notes, or you don't want to take notes, or you're not good at taking notes. All right, fine. Let's see what this looks like. If you're not good at taking notes, you can't write down a lot. You really don't feel comfortable about taking notes. All right, let's do it with, I'm going to give myself a challenge here. I'm going to write down just 7 words. That's it. I'm going to write down just 7 words from this lecture. Now, let me ask you, when you're listening to a lecture here, when you're listening to a lecture, what's the goal? What are you trying to figure out? What are you trying to find from the lecture? You want to be proactive when you're listening to the lecture. You want to be able to, have a goal before you start to listen. If you're just going into this and thinking to yourself, I'm going to try to understand everything, that's not going to be so helpful. Okay, so if you're just trying to understand everything, it's not a bad thing, but it's not a great goal. So what do you want to listen to before? So what are you trying to figure out before? So one question that I always ask myself before I start listening is, what does, and I apologize for my handwriting, what does the professor want the students, I should have just said this and not write it down. Now you guys can see my terrible handwriting. If you can read that, congratulations. What does the professor want the students to know? What does the professor want the students to know by the end of this? What's the most important thing? Usually in the beginning, the professor is going to give some context, some kind of general introduction. So we're kind of on the same page. We kind of understand what the topic is going to be about. And then we'll probably give 2 subtopics, give 2 examples of this new topic. So the professor has to imagine that you have no idea what he's going to talk about. Okay, so let's say, for example, he's going to talk about camouflage. Now, it's a biology class, and he's going to talk about camouflage. Now, the beginning will probably be something like, now you guys probably know about camouflage in the Army, right? That's where the soldiers wear green and brown and darker colors so they can blend in to their environment. So they have to try to start by setting the context, trying to give you some overall picture that you can relate to. Oh yeah, camouflage. Oh, those army clothes. Okay, I think I know what this topic is kind of like. Then goes into 2 subtopics. Well, one animal that uses camouflage really well is the chameleon. I think that's right. Anyway, I'm not a biology person. So the chameleon will blend into surroundings, give examples, and talk about the chameleon a little bit. And then another example of the chameleon is another example of camouflage besides the chameleon is, so chameleons use it to hide from predators. Predators that use camouflage are, let's say, lions using the savanna grass, blending into the environment using the savanna grass. So that would be the second example. So the lecture is something like that. Your goal is to figure out what the topic is and what are the subtopics and what's the most important stuff the teacher wants the student to know. So if I were to write that down, I would just write down something like chameleon, camouflage, lions. That's it, I guess. So I'm sure I'll write down, I'm only going to write down 7 words here. But that's just the kind of idea. So you want to have that goal in mind. Let's listen together. And let me just see if anybody else had any questions here. Okay, somebody asked a good question. Is this going to be saved to the line stream, saved to the channel? Well, I want you to stay, so I'm going to say no, but yes, it will be saved to the channel. And yeah, it'll be saved. It'll be saved. How many people are not English speakers in this chat? So, some people get a little intimidated because, I mean, all you guys are learning English as a second language, and I'm speaking English this whole time. I mean, it's very impressive that you're still here. Thank you. It's amazing. And let me give you a little bit of cheers. Yeah! I haven't done that yet. So it's pretty amazing that you're still here. So don't get too intimidated if this is difficult. It's difficult. English is your second language. Just take it one step at a time. All right, I'm gonna write down 7 words. Let's listen to this lecture, and let's do it. I haven't used any of my sound effects yet.
Now listen to part of a talk in a sociology class.
Now, polling has changed over the years. The first opinion poll was taken in 1824. It asked voters how they voted as they left their polling places. Informal polls are called straw polls, and they informally collect opinions of a non-random population or group. Newspapers and social media continue the tradition of unofficial polls, mainly because interested readers want to know how elections will end. Facebook and online newspapers often offer informal pop-up quizzes that ask a single question about politics or an event. The poll is not meant to be formal, but it provides a general idea of what people think. Have any of you taken a poll before?
Yeah, me and some of my classmates in another class were asked by researchers about our opinions on the upcoming election, but it doesn't sound like a straw poll. They asked a bunch of questions about our background and even came back again to ask us the same questions.
Ah, I see. Well, that sounds like a public opinion poll. These polls are far more sophisticated than straw polls and are carefully designed to probe what we think, want, and value. The information they gather may be given to politicians or newspapers and is analyzed by mathematicians and social scientists.
Professor, I have a question. So, since it sounds like most media outlets use straw polls, are you saying that we shouldn't trust them?
Well, not exactly. While it's true that straw polls are much more informal, they can still provide us with a ton of useful information. You see, most public opinion polls, like the ones Brienne and her classmates were exposed to, aim to be accurate. But this is not an easy task. Political polling is a science. From design to implementation, polls are complex and require careful planning and care. Our history is filled with examples of polling companies producing results that incorrectly predicted public opinion due to poor survey design or bad polling methods. So, even if you carefully design and plan a poll, it can still turn out to have serious flaws. Look, most polling companies employ professionals trained in conducting polls and analyzing data. This is a serious business. A number of criteria must be met if a poll is to be completed scientifically. First, they must identify the group of respondents they want to interview. For example, if the goal is to project who will win the presidency, citizens from across the United States should be interviewed. The people who are interviewed are the sample group. A representative sample consists of a group whose demographic distribution is similar to that of the overall population. For example, nearly 51% of the U.S. population is female. To match this demographic distribution of women, any poll intending to measure what most Americans think about an issue should survey a sample containing slightly more women than men. But the question remains, how do you know whether a poll's results are reliable? First, look for the numbers. Polling companies include the margin of error, polling dates, number of respondents, and population sampled to show their scientific reliability. And remember, for a number of reasons, even public opinion polls that go through all of this detail may not produce accurate results. Two important factors a polling company faces are timing and human nature. Unless you conduct an exit poll during an election and interviewers stand at the polling places on election day to ask viewers how they voted, there is always the possibility the poll results will be wrong. The simplest reason is that if there is time between the poll and election day, a citizen might change his or her mind, lie, or choose not to vote at all. Timing is very important during elections because surprise events can shift enough opinions to change an election result. Of course, there are many other reasons why polls may be inaccurate.
Okay, so let me go to the question here. What is the lecture mainly about? All right, the next one. This is a table. You have to put in X in the right place, okay? Based on the information from the listening, indicate which characteristic on the left belongs to either straw polls or public opinion polls. Mark the correct answers with an X. This question is worth 2 points. By the way, you can write in the chat as well what you think the answer is. Oop. Okay, next one. What should you look for to identify whether or not a poll is reliable? Select 2. Select 2. Next one. Why is timing important for public opinion polls? By the way, I'm giving you less time than usual. You'll usually have a little bit more time, but I'm just kind of going quickly here. And go ahead, put your answer in the chat, by the way. Number 5, two more. There's 6 questions. Why does Professor mention that 51% of the U.S. population is female? Last one, number 6. Why does the professor discuss straw polls? All right, that's time. So, first of all, in the chat, sorry, I'm gonna stretch. First of all, in the chat, I see people, having side conversations and all that stuff. It's great. I love it. Other things come up that I don't think about when I'm talking here, so it's great for you guys to be participating and getting to know each other a bit better. People from all over the world here talking. It's very nice. So let me go through the answers, and I'll just explain really quickly why I wrote these words here in my notes first. So, Again, I'm looking for the two kind of subtopics, and I figured that right away when they said straw polls and public opinion polls. It was also written on the bottom of the text too, so I figured that was pretty important. Let me change the color here. So straw polls and public opinion polls, and I just wanted to know the main characteristic. So what is the main characteristic of these straw polls? Well, they're informal. And the public opinion polls are designed. They are much more formal. And then they give a bunch of details about it. So I'm just kind of thinking, when I'm listening, I'm just kind of thinking about the main characteristic of it. So that's what I wrote here. The representative sample is smaller. Similar, excuse me. This is where your notes kind of get you in trouble. Is similar. So I remember that. So when I just write down these words, I can kind of remember all this other stuff. So let's say, for example, you want to know what Americans think about the president. You have to get a sample of 100 people, and that 100 people should be similar to the character of the American population. So the example they gave, I think, was 51% women. So you should have 51%, 51 out of 49 people should be women for this sample, for example. I remember that. And then I remember at the end, they mentioned timing as a big issue. Okay, so I have this information, not a lot of notes, but let's see if I can answer the questions, and we'll talk about it. So let me go to the next one. Okay, this is the PDF, and so it's easier for me to do it this way. So what's the lecture mainly about? Let's see. A, difference between public opinion poll and straw poll, the importance of public opinion polls, how public polls are conducted, how timing affects the results of polls. So everyone has something different. And so let's see what the answer key says here. Let's see. Boop, 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 boop. I'm pretty sure it's, yeah. Okay, get there. Okay. So the answer is C. A can be eliminated because professor does not elaborate on straw polls aside from the very beginning. B and D are ideas that pertain to just parts of the lecture. So this is what it's mainly about. So C would be the best answer. So let me go back up so we can see that. Okay. So yeah, so he kind of explains, the representative sample, they have to be similar. It talks about the design. So I thought it could be A at first because I was, just listening to the beginning really, and I kind of zoned out after that for a little bit. But really only the first 30 seconds talks about straw polls, and then the rest of it is about public opinion polls and how they work. The big reason why B is not correct is because the importance. It doesn't really say why they're so important. It just basically explains why, how they're designed and how they're helpful compared, how they conduct these polls to make sure they're reliable. That's basically what it's about. So which characteristics belong on the left? So carefully designed. So this I can use my notes here. So I know that public opinion polls are designed, right? Okay, so I can check that. Normally conducted by newspapers or social media, I believe that's straw polls, right? And probably will consist of just one question. I believe that's straw polls as well. I didn't hear that detail there, so let me just check and see if that's right or not. Yeah, so it's these two. So public opinion poll, the first one, and then the next two are this. While I'm down here, number 3 is B and C. Let's go back up and see what the question was. And sorry, I'm jumping back and forth here. Hopefully you can see everything okay. So what should you look for whether it's reliable? That the sample population is a good sample. I wrote that down, sample population, and the margin of error. This I didn't hear with these notes. This I probably would have gotten wrong with the notes here because I didn't write down that detail. So this is an example of where notes can be pretty helpful. These other two I could kind of figure out with very minimal notes, but this one here would have been harder. Why is the timing important? Okay, so I kind of heard this. Let's see. Because research can only ask people questions right after. Is that true? Okay, I don't think it's B because people don't tell the truth. That's a little too negative. People tend to give more negative answers in the morning. This is a little silly. D, because something could always happen to change someone's mind before an actual election. D sounds like the best answer. I remember they mentioned that at the end. I'll check. I'll check to make sure I'm right here. Yeah, 4 is D, 5 is A, and 6 is D. So let's see, 5. To give an example, what represents look like? Okay. To prove that are more accurate than straw polls. Okay, so that's why C is the best answer, right? Is that right? I just want to double check myself, make sure I'm correct here. Which one? Where am I? D is the best answer for number 6. Okay, so D is just to go back here. To explain that these polls can still be useful. Okay, I see. I thought C would be okay, but I guess he's not trying to prove anything, which is the big word that kind of makes this incorrect, because the goal is not really to prove that public opinion polls are better, but the goal instead is to just kind of explain the difference between the two and explain how public opinion polls work. So that's why prove is the wrong word. Okay, so it should be to explain that these polls are still useful. All right, so I'm a little rusty, but hopefully you found that helpful. And if you are still here, that's amazing. I'll go to the chat, see if there's any extra questions. People are just sad. There's some sad faces based on the results. Yeah, these questions are tricky. They're just tiny little words change, and it changes the whole meaning of something, right? So that's really hard to get used to. So pay attention to that. Be careful.